This
to
conference
mention
will
that
now be recorded.
first I want to mention that the workshop, the Linux Boot workshop, which will happen on March 3rd, is well underway. We're preparing some presentations. It will be using the Atomic Pi as a development board. So if you want to join, please sign up. I sent out the link on the mailing list. And the major thing I want to cover today is the OCP OSF checklist. I sent out the link last night, so if you want to open that, we'll go over it, go over any issues anyone has, and we'll try our best to resolve them and to update the document. All right, so let's begin with, so we saw that there's a contribution here from Jiming Sun. Under standard compliance, inter-component interfaces are required to test BMC or microcontroller interfaces, such as IPMI, CoAP, etc. Any thoughts on this? Should this be?
Let's read that again.
Intercomponents, so intercomponent interfaces, such as IPMI, are required to test BMC or microcontroller interfaces. Does anyone have any thoughts on whether this should be part of the checklist for OSF compliance system?
I would take out the word required because Jonathan points out that not everything has a BMC. I mean, I know of one effort out there that's going to try and build systems with no BMC. So if you say required, then that throws that other thing into kind of a
yes, but if there is a BMC, should the software be available to communicate with it?
That would require the BMC people to also get involved, wouldn't it? I mean, it's not just our side, it's the other side too, right? I don't know. What software talks to the BMC typically in UEFI today? Does anyone know?
Yeah, it is. There are two kind of channels, basically, in-band and sideband. Usually, sideband is some sort of management processor, management entity, which is part of your server platform or the SoC design. That interface is, so far it has been custom, basically provided by SoC vendor usually, or defined by SoC vendor, and it's being taken up as part of the SBMG group that ARM is running to standardize that aspect. And then there is another in-band communication channel, which is SSIF based. So that UEFI owns it initially in the early boot, and then it gets handed over to the OS. So these are the typically two channels over which the firmware running on the target is talking to BMC.
And how much? I would expect that in general, the main communications to the BMC will be post-boot between Linux and the BMC, or is that incorrect, or?
That's not the case. So BMC for a lot of telemetry information talks through this the sideband channel to this management entity, which is usually part of the firmware, and that communication is more often than talking to the Linux. So on that interface, typically BMC is the master, and it is the one that's originating requests for this management entity or this firmware component. And then on the other SAF interface.
So in the case of ARM, though, isn't that communicating with ARM trusted firmware?
No, it's not necessarily ARM trusted firmware. Typically, it is not. Otherwise, it's gonna steal. Go ahead.
So what is it then? UEFI runtime?
No, it's independent. So in the examples that I have seen so far, it is a dedicated processor, less powerful, but say an A53 or an M series core that's
Okay, hang
performing.
on though. That's what you're talking about, the BMC now, right? How that's implemented.
No. I'm talking about this
Okay.
management entity, which is part of the
Oh.
server SoC. Yeah.
Oh.
It's like Intel MCP, I guess, right? It's similar to that. It's an independent processor.
Very different than x86 universe then. Because I think
by the way, are we
item
sharing
2
any?
here is.
Sorry.
I just think item 2 is very x86 centric, and even more very x86 centric to a subset of x86 systems.
But I think the rationale behind this this requirement is that if you have a system running open system firmware, you should have the ability to communicate with whatever BMC or microcontroller is on the machine. You shouldn't lose that ability because you're using open system firmware.
Hey guys, sorry, before we go ahead, are we sharing anything? Because I don't think I see anything on the screen, and I'm wondering if it's me or.
Oh, no, nothing is being shared. I sent out the link to the mailing list just yesterday.
Can you share it?
Nathan, are you able to share the link?
No, I mean your screen.
I can open it.
Getting these emails.
Ryan, you need to share your own screen. You've connected the right way to do that, right?
That'd be great if you could share so that we all can stare at the same screen.
Yeah.
I am on a Chromebook. I can't have 3 streams going. That's too much.
I'll figure out how to share my screen. Hold on a second. So if not, you can find the link to the document in the mailing list, and you can follow along with where we are. I will reiterate the requirement.
I posted it in the chat window as well.
All right, thank you.
But
What page are we on?
Hey,
we're
Ryan.
on the standard compliance section, which is after boot and before firmware configuration. And we're specifically on that bullet 2, which I'm a little uncomfortable with, I have to say myself, because it presupposes certain things that aren't really always applicable. Maybe we should say, how did this happen? Anyway, maybe we could say on systems which provide additional components, comma, or something like that. Or maybe it's not that big a deal, I don't know.
So I agree the wording can be improved, but I think that the general idea makes sense. If there is a BMC or microcontroller on the system.
Well, you can add that as a lead-in, if there is a BMC or microcontroller, comma, and then the rest of it works.
Yeah, sounds good.
That's just a thought. I mean, maybe that's.
But would everyone be all right with such a requirement?
So the goal is basically, again, this is checklist, making sure that if this firmware is targeted for a platform with BMC, we are testing BMC interface as well. But we are not specifying what that interface may be. It is still governed by who. Because there are options, right? It could be IPMI, it could be Redfish, and then there is the sideband component.
Yeah, so So the requirement is flexible in that it doesn't matter what the option is, as long as it's been tested and it's available on an open system firmware machine.
Yeah, I think as a
Seems reasonable.
checklist, probably it's okay.
All right, sounds good.
Hey, but I wanted to go back to number one, actually. Um, um, in the standard compliance, that even for a checklist, it seems to be pretty open-ended, isn't it? For a given architecture family, standard tables required to boot and run a reasonable set of kernels need to be provided. That I'm not sure um, how to interpret this. Um, uh, when we say tables, we are specifically referring to ACPI. But in our example, we are saying, yeah, it could be ACPI or it could be device tree based. So this statement seems, at least to me, I'm not 100% sure how to interpret it.
All right, so it might be better to, yes, replace the word table, to make it more generic, replace the word tables with interfaces.
Yeah.
That may bring in the problem with interfaces to some extent is then, are you going to require UEFI runtime, which in the case of the Neoverse, we're explicitly trying to remove all of UEFI and still boot. So data structures, I'm comfortable with that wording, so I'm not entirely sure how I'd want to change it.
But what are we thinking though when we say standard tables? What are
And
these
Mike,
standard tables?
well, I mean, on x86, you've got to provide ACP, and you may need to provide, what is it, SMBIOS tables. And on Power, it's all about flattened device tree. So, I mean, it's very it's system dependent. So a different example, on an ARM that people expect to have FDT and nothing else, that will be sufficient. On a different ARM that we might be replacing, we might be using UEFI and not removing it completely, then certain ARM platforms expect ACP tables as well. So there's a lot, it's such a broad range of possibilities that there's going to be, I think, some ambiguity.
Right.
Yeah,
So,
I mean,
maybe we should just focus on solving the ambiguity by adding something that says, look, these don't have to be fully feature compliant for everything supported by the hardware or the OS. And something that gets to the intention, right? The intention is that some OS can boot, not that all OSs are fully featured with all of the SMBIOS and ACPI capabilities known. Correct?
yeah. I mean, yeah. Do you want to throw a sentence into that effect, Isaac? Sort of.
so are we saying that it's either or, that, hey, I mean, as long as your firmware is able to boot an OS, which could be either ACPI compliant OS or device tree compliant OS, we are good. That's basically what we're saying.
So if you go up one section under boot, number one, there's a requirement the platform with OSF must be capable of booting an operating system whose code is openly available under an OSI approved license, such as Linux. So I think that encompasses what you said.
Yeah, that's interesting. So there is definitely an overlap between the two, right? Number one in the boot and number one in the standard compliance. I guess we are, it seems like in the standard compliance, we are going one level deeper, right? Saying that, yeah, I mean, these are typically the standards that we have seen in the operating system,
Yeah.
and therefore our firmware needs to be compliant with it to be able to boot it. Right? ACPI and device tree are the two, at least as far as Linux is concerned.
Yes, I see. So I think what the point number one in student compliance is trying to say is it shouldn't be some one-off proprietary data structure which is being patched to boot the operating system. It should be something which is relatively accepted in the industry. We're not exactly pinning down ACP as that thing or device tree as that thing, but it should be something which other people are using.
Yeah, but at least it is. That's I guess that was my objection, that it's very open-ended, right? I don't know how we can. So ultimately, the goal of this checklist is to certify a particular firmware, right? How this
Yes, that's
particular
it.
item, how this particular item will help with that goal, right? If we leave it that open-ended. I don't know if that I guess objection, others don't see a problem with that. I'm okay. It was just my interpretation of this particular bullet is what I was having trouble with.
Yeah. I actually don't see any way around it because the scale, the variety of systems, like Power 9, for example, to some extent we've had to be very careful not to write this in a way that we suddenly rolled out Power 9, because at the moment we have had one. Elaine has been careful to remind us not to somehow write them out. And so we're trying to make sure that we don't inadvertently write this in a way that all of a sudden some processor or company finds themselves on the outside of the circle. And it may be that it's so hard to write this that maybe we should just let section 1 of boot cover it, and maybe it shouldn't be here. I don't know, but I'm pretty personally, I'm okay with it, but you know, that's me.
Yeah,
It is a
sounds
hard problem.
good. I think,
Yeah.
But personally, I would probably prefer interface instead of table, and that will that'll at least give me some level of comfort with this. But I think if we all are okay with table, I'm good.
So you're suggesting the minimum standard interface contents?
Yeah,
Minimum standard
content.
interfaces?
Yeah, interfaces, right.
Yep, sounds good. All right. So I'd also like to revisit the issue we brought up last week with the ownership and reusability section. This is still a difficult issue. I don't think we have found a great solution to it. I'm wondering if anyone else has come up with any thoughts for the.
Yeah. So Ryan, I put up a comment there. I think there is a link. I don't know if it makes sense. If you look at today's version, I put a link to, there is an OCP forum, right, where they are working on the security requirement for OCP compliant platforms. Except for the C, right, where we are saying that specific number of keys that allows change of ownership a certain number of times. Everything else, I would expect to be captured on that, right? For example, firmware update, they have a very, just to be clear though, there are no formal specs out there yet, right? They have a charter, and that charter captures at least A, C, D, and basically D and E are kind of related in that sense, right? Changing ownership is changing a key. So I guess what I was gonna ask is, how are we planning on kind of reconciling the two specs, right? Since this is also part of the OCP body, I'm thinking at some point this will have to refer to those specs, right, once they are ratified. That this platform needs to comply with OCP security standards. Is that not so?
Yeah, so I think,
I
so I
would
mean,
defer that to a future date when those standards are more mature. So I think that's why we haven't spoken on it. I mean, I think that's the intention, that we should align with other OCP standards, obviously. But I
Okay.
think it just would scare people if they're like, oh, I've got to sign up for a security thing that's undefined and immature, and that has burned a lot of people lots of times in the past, I think.
yeah, so security is important, and we should align with those specs which are being developed by the security group. However, the main focus here is the ownership of the system. You need to be able to purchase an OCP node and apply OSF firmware to it. You don't want some security feature on the machine preventing you from doing that.
Ryan, the point being, I think the requirements that we're trying to outline here, right? A, B, D specifically, they will be captured by that spec, right? I guess we are looking at it from ownership perspective. They are looking at it from secure boot perspective, but the goal is the same, that the firmware running on a device must be authenticated, the device part there must be interfaces to attest a part, make sure that the part is genuine and the firmware running on it is genuine, right? And then there should be mechanism to revoke a key if it's compromised and sign firmware with a different key, which essentially boils down to the change of ownership, right? So the fundamental building blocks that they are trying to define will satisfy these requirements as well. And I can see that point, right? Where if the specs are not ratified, if we think that this OSF checklist is going to be out there before the security specs are there, then we have a challenge here, right? So, but ultimately, I think even if we try to at least capture a set of security requirements here, we want to make sure that at least initially also they are aligned with the goals that security forum has set up for itself, right? Otherwise, we have this spec asking for a set of security requirements, and then the OCP security spec is maybe taking a different approach, and then we have a bigger challenge, I guess, in terms of backward compatibility. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I mean, is it safe to say though that the security spec is concerned with how to implement it, or what, or defining requirements?
It is. I'm sorry. Could you please ask that question again? I'm not sure I interpreted
Well,
it correctly.
to some extent, in some sense, we're consumers in this of the security spec. But as consumers of that spec, we need to be able to state a minimum set of requirements to meet what we need to do. So we could argue that these items under ownership and reusability, we need to communicate them to the security guys and make sure things aren't left out. And
Yeah, I completely agree.
yeah, so I think maybe we really need to add a note here that says, you know, and that we don't forget that we need to get with those guys, and we're lucky because one of them works 2 floors down from us. We can talk to him about it, but we need to make sure that and I think this is all what you're saying too, really. We need to make sure that what we have here is in sync with what they're doing. I just came to your conclusion. Sorry, took me a while.
No worries. So we are in agreement. I think that makes sense to me, and that's all I wanted to say.
Yeah, I would actually put it in the text, not as a thing, because well, I don't know, whatever you want to do. I really, I don't want us to drop the ball, and then that would be bad. Okay.
Sounds good. So I see the point. So we don't want to explicitly state security requirements, but we want to state requirements for ownership that align with the security requirements from the security group.
Yeah, we're essentially consumers, and we have these things we've got to have, and we need to make sure that they know what it is we have to have.
Yeah.
And if we don't tell them, that's our mistake, and if they don't implement them, that's their mistake. But we have to make sure it gets done. You know.
Makes sense.
So there is one more related question I had on the previous section. I think you can see my comment on the top of this page, right? Which is the second part of that statement, right? 2A in the building blocks section.
Yes.
When we say it must be possible to update the key with a new key, I guess since we were talking about it in the context of building the firmware from source and the binary blocks available, I was not sure if this is implying that it should be possible to re-sign an existing firmware, or is it actually talking about change of ownership sub-bullet under the ownership and reusability? That's the part which is not clear to me.
Yes.
Yeah, I think the word update is a little awkward there. Maybe it should be replaced.
Yeah.
Would that help?
There is still one more
So
clarification needed, I think.
I would
Yeah,
argue that this is out of place, though. If we've got the whole section on ownership and reusability that talks about the details, let's move anything we want to say in the sub-bullet A down into the ownership and reusability.
I agree. Unless the intent here is to talk about the firmware signing and re-signing, it should move out of it, right? So if the intent is actually provisioning a different key and then allowing firmware to be signed with that new key, then it's more in the ownership section. But if it is about being able to re-sign an existing firmware blob with a new key without necessarily needing to rebuild it, then maybe it can stay here. And
I believe it should stay in this section. So this is about which key the firmware is signed at build time. So when the BIOS for the firmware is built, which key it uses, or if someone wants to re-sign it with a different key, this is inside the build system. It's not on the machine itself.
but the first part of that statement captures that, don't you think? So if the platform requires signed firmware, it shall be possible for the owner to sign the image with a user-provided key. And that user-provided key doesn't have to be fixed, right? I mean, that's how I was interpreting it. So it could be every instance of build and sign could potentially use different key. It's just a certificate in your file system that your build tool uses, right? So it's basically a command line option.
Would it work to replace the sentence with that you highlighted with "it must be possible to re-sign the firmware with a new key"?
Yeah, that I have seen examples of that, and that I think is a useful. That's a useful facility.
Sounds good. I made the change.
Yeah. All right. Sounds good to me. Thanks.
So as for the section on documentation, has anyone had any thoughts on the delineation of EVT versus DVT versus PVT? Is that a good system, or what do people think?
I tend to agree with a comment there. I think from David, I believe, that says that it's probably too detailed. EVT, DVT, PVT. It could potentially be collapsed into a single validation ready kind of category.
Do people know what MP means? Is that a commonly understood term? Could we then turn it into production ready, evaluation ready, and then, you know, product ready or something? Does that make it a little simpler or more clear? Or do you just want power on ready and productized?
I think the one in between, right, that you're calling evaluation ready or validation ready, I think that would make sense to have. And then MP essentially is production ready. So if production ready does sound more generic term. So maybe power on ready, evaluation ready, production ready would be
Yeah.
good 3 categories to have.
And then question here: are those clear? If we say power on ready, evaluation ready, production ready, maybe we can delete the text explaining what those mean, because what that means is apparent from the names. And then that simplifies that section and maybe leaves a little. Sometimes ambiguity can be your friend, because you try and lay things out and it just gets more confused. Would that be okay?
I think that would make sense.
Okay, so we'll just adopt the text power on ready, evaluation ready, product or production ready, and we don't need explanatory text because those terms are clear, and we'll go with that.
Sounds good.
All right, you want to do it?
Yeah. I'll do it later today.
Okay.
I'll make that change. Are there any other comments about this initial checklist?
Hi, this is Sri. Just on those terms, I probably don't want to weigh in just yet, but is it okay if I weigh in later? Just mostly because I don't know what production ready means, since being kind of new to the project. So
I actually wonder if we should we forget about production ready and just change it to one word, product, and let it go. So you can turn it on, you can evaluate it, you can buy it. You know.
That would make more sense for me, at least from what I do.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm a real fan of as few words as possible, because every word is another giant ambiguity space. Okay. Next.
What do people think about the firmware upgrade section? The open source block of the firmware or open source tools running in band can update the entire firmware image, including blobs. So the idea here is you should be able to use the tools such as Flashron to update your firmware.
But actually, that's a different statement than that, because that's saying it can update itself there, right? That's saying the open source part of the firmware can update the firmware. That's a different statement than, in some sense, right? Me personally, I don't like self-updating firmware, but that's me personally. So.
Yeah, I personally would prefer we don't say anything about this, because I'm concerned there's going to be a stronger push for managing the firmware from another microcontroller like the BMC, or manageability or security engines of a system that are much more, I don't know about proprietary, but they're not the main system firmware. So I guess maybe we could clarify that we aren't expecting the main system firmware we're not requiring the main system firmware to have this update capability. But if it does, it should be in the open source block. Maybe that's
And and this can get really nasty. Like if you could interpret this to say ability to upgrade option ROMs on add-in cards and that kind of stuff. Where
Oh boy.
that's it gets really gross if we word it wrong, right?
I mean, because this has been a problem, would it be reasonable to say firmware upgrade must not require proprietary or closed source tools, and leave it at that? But then we get into what about the secret bits that enable writing the flashcard? So,
Oh, and then you run into things like, oh, how do I upgrade the firmware on my trackpad or my touch screen? I know those are not terribly applicable for OCP, but there's usually like a ton of like weird things across the system that have like their own strange firmwares.
Yeah.
I think earlier in the document we have explicitly excluded, right? If you go back to what it does not cover, it says it does not apply to device firmware and BMC. So the examples of your option ROM, sorry.
Yes, this document only applies to host firmware.
Yeah, we can't. We don't want to. Key thing here is we do not want to solve the world's problems. We just can't. And I'd like to, but we can't. So could we simply say that the mechanism required to upgrade firmware must be described in an open manner or something like that? Like, forget about specifying like what would do it or whatever. We want to say however we do it. We want to have that be clearly documented. Would that help?
And
so is it a bridge too far though? Like what if we just envision that you get a system with open source firmware from the ODM, but there's a magic tool. There's nothing that prevents us from, upgrading the firmware to what we want, verifying that it's what we want. Is that really so bad that we want to solve it with the checklist? I guess I would see that we'd meet our main goal of open system firmware without requiring open tools.
If you require a tool that doesn't have source or documentation for somebody to implement another way, then nobody will know what's in there for security review.
Yeah.
And if you want to run that at data center scale, people are going to be a bit nervous.
Yes.
Yeah, they can't trust the tool. They don't. Yeah, if they don't see the source, right?
Yeah, you're right. I'm assuming something like SPY that you can see the result. Like I can see that what I put in there is exactly the same as what's in there. But yeah, that was an assumption.
I think, Isaac, it's got to be open. I think one thing people are going to be worried about is depending on a tool that might bit rot, three sales away from the origin. Like, again, IT Renew, I'm glad they're here, but IT Renew has got systems they got, and they're like the Winterfells now are what, I think 7 years old. I think it's really asking. I don't think it's possible to ask people to run with a proprietary tool. I just don't think it'll work.
Just to make sure, guys, right, that it seems to be that there are two aspects to this requirement, right? And we seem to be breaking them down into two. One is basically this in-band term there, right? Being able to firmware update in-band. And at least based on my past experience, I have certain interpretation of that term. I don't know. I mean, I like the suggestion where we are saying, hey, no matter how you implement the firmware update, the tool must be open source. That seems to be clear enough and simple enough requirement. But if we wanna, I guess the invent term here, to me at least, implies a certain mechanism to be supported as well, right? Which is, hey, on the
Yeah.
host OS itself. Yeah. So
Yeah, I agree with you. I
what?
think
Sorry.
this is too prescriptive, and the real goal is that we need to know how to do it, but we shouldn't be prescribing. We shouldn't be down in so far as to use the term in-band. I think
How
it's too
about
prescriptive.
how about the wording? The software required to update the firmware must be open source.
Period. Done. Yeah.
Or
Sounds good.
alternatively, the interface to do so is fully documented publicly.
Yeah. And Nathan, the only thing you get into there is you know we get into these interfaces that are documented publicly, but for whatever reason end up being inaccessible anyway. You know, I'm thinking
Yeah,
I always
it's
go back to the Motorola Easy Rocker where it was all totally documented, but you couldn't do a damn thing with it. We want to make it clear that
I'd rather
it
not
has
talk
to be
about
achievable.
I'd rather not talk about tools and interfaces and that kind of stuff. I'd rather just say, there's some piece of software somewhere. It might be a tool, it might be firmware, who knows, who cares? It's just open source and we can use it.
Yeah.
Right? That's what we care about.
Yeah.
I actually like the API. I actually like the API too, mostly because we can always write another, maybe better or improved open source tool based on those APIs later. So that's something to consider.
Yeah,
at least
but
from
that's a
IT.
secondary goal, right? I mean, if it is open source already, then you can go construct an API around the source that's there. The important thing from a requirement standpoint is just that it's possible to do that.
How about this one? An open source tool must exist to update the firmware, or sufficient documentation exists to rate such a tool.
The only
again,
the only thing I would change maybe is from tool to software.
Makes sense.
Yes, and the other, I still think because I've gotten burned on this. Oh, go ahead, Nathan.
Sorry, the sufficient documentation exists thing may be a problem if, for example, the sufficient documentation is available under restricted secret NDA.
Restricted.
Not to pick on any particular companies, just a random.
Totally. Sufficient open documentation or sufficient publicly available. Yeah. Now, the other thing, though, I still think we haven't really addressed the intent, which is it must always be possible for a customer to update the firmware, right? And again, this gets back to the Motorola example where you knew everything you needed to know, but it still wasn't possible. So I still think bullet one should make it clear. There should be, another thing under firmware upgrade that just clearly states it must always be possible for the customer to upgrade the firmware.
Yeah, so that's also covered in the ownership and reusability section.
Okay.
Update the firmware on the machine.
But we've already seen a case where someone read a part of this and we referenced it in another part and that wasn't clear. So I still think I would like to see it under firmware upgrade too. But
are we saying that instead of or it should be and? That opens. Are we saying that instead of or in the statement it's an and, that two software must exist?
No, what I'm saying is that there have been systems shipped in which the way you upgrade firmware was clearly specified that because of the nature of the system, you still couldn't upgrade the firmware. And I'm really worried that's going to get lost in here somewhere. And so from my point of view, you can't say it enough times, even if it's redundant. But if this is good enough, it's good enough.
So I think there's another potential aspect to this, like I don't know if you guys saw the recent thing about the Sonos speakers and the quote-unquote recycling mode.
Oh my God.
Do we
This
want
sounds
to
bad.
outlaw such a thing through this
What is that
document?
again?
So you punch in some code and then it goes into recycling mode and then the device bricks itself on purpose.
Holy crap.
Yeah.
Well, suggestion, however you want to say it. That's fantastic.
Yeah, I think we probably want to not allow that.
Yeah.
The Sonos app gives you 21 days to cancel. Me as a Sonos owner.
Yeah, so how would you
I'm one
word,
too.
yeah, how would you word such a requirement? To say that it shouldn't break itself when you try to update the firmware, or how exactly would you phrase that?
I think it's
I think it's a corner case that you use discretion when providing the logo if there's such a system, and you say, listen, that's clearly violating the intent of updatable by the user.
I think we want to get maybe something about to Ron's point. It should be possible to update the system regardless of where it is in its life cycle, right?
Sounds good. This is, to some extent, this is reiterating the point in
Yep.
the reusability section.
Yep. But there's a principle at work here, which is you can't say it enough times. I cannot. It came up recently that in spite of all the papers we released to the IC and all the talks we gave to the IC and all the phone calls we had with the IC, there was still a small amount of confusion on the part of one person on the IC that we were requiring all the vendors to release all the source to all their firmware. And, you know, I can't tell you how many times I said, we're not requiring you to open source all your blobs, and said somehow we missed it with one person. It was really a bummer, but the takeaway for me is you can't say certain things enough times, or they'll get, if you say it once, it's almost certainly going to get missed when it's this important. That's nice. I like point 2. That looks really good now. Yeah.
Okay, so it looks like we're near the end of the meeting. Does anyone have any more comments about this transition? This checklist? If not, does anyone have any more comments or things you want to bring up for OSF in general?
Oh, people know about people coming to the Vini in March? I'm just curious. I
The
hope you all
Global
are.
Summit, you mean?
Yeah.
Yes.
This is
Yeah,
Trey. I'll be there.
Good. We're going to have some pretty cool stuff. HPE will be there with the Linux boot node. We're going to have a class on how to, you know, work with the software. It's going to be pretty busy. So Facebook will be there with, I believe, some pretty neat stuff. I don't want to speak for them, but it's going to be pretty cool.
Yeah, and we're in the process of planning the experience lab. It looks like it'll be a little bit crowded, kind of similar to how it was in Amsterdam. We'll have, by default, they give us one 8-foot table with 10 amps of power, I believe. So I've requested a second table and hopefully some more power. But yeah, at least Facebook, HPE, and WeWin will have some systems to demo. So if you want to bring some hardware to set up on the table and show off, do some live demos, that'd be great. Just let us know. you can email me directly, and I can add you as an organizer for the experience lab, and we can, try to squeeze you in.
That would be great. I know I would like to get one of our machines out there. So.
Oh, who's that again? Sorry, you show up as caller 2.
Yeah, this is Sri Ramakrishna. I work for IT Renew. So, a lot of our machines and servers are, intended to be OCP compliant. So we will we would like to probably want to show up. I'm committing my company to this, so they don't know this.
Oh, excellent. Are you in Fremont by chance?
I'm actually in Portland, Oregon. But in fact, I was just in California yesterday. But maybe next time I would love to meet up.
Okay, cool.
Great. Yeah.
This is Jonathan. So back to this checklist. If it looks okay for everybody at this moment, Ryan, could you maybe clean this document up, and then for the final review and for everybody, give it another 2 weeks, or what do you think?
Oh, I think it's going to take longer than 2 weeks. we'll probably
because right now there's a lot of comments, right? So it's not very clear. So we do need to make it more clear in the document to address the comments, and then.
I mean, I kind of really agree strongly that we do need to basically create a ship date just to motivate it. I mean, what about a month from now then? Would that work?
So I think an initial revision would be great, but I would like to keep it open until September. Like in the previous schedule, we talked about September of this year as the requirements finalized, so ODM can design their system based on known hardware and known requirements. So I'm all good for a cleaned up first rev, but I would like to keep it open throughout much of this year as people are doing a lot of development on these things. So I think we're going to learn more.
Yeah, I think after so I think it would go in parallel, because it would need to go through review by other person as well, right? Like other OCP projects. So the September date would be finalized, agreed by everybody, including OSF project and other projects and all the stakeholders.
Okay.
That is it. That is an excellent point.
Yeah.
There's going to be some bureaucratic review phases, most likely.
Yeah.
Would everyone be happy with the first revision, March 6th, so in 4 weeks from now?
So how do we determine that March 6th date, what it means for? Does that mean that we as OCP project, we feel like this is good for the IC review, and we reserve some right to change later on as well?
Yes, so there'll be a possibility to change it later on.
Right.
It's at a state where we as OSF are happy with this document.
Yeah, I'm sure IC will come back with comments, and we need to discuss. That's for sure. I think so.
Okay. All right. Well, we're done.
All right, so this is the last minute. So thank you all for joining. We'll see you all in 2 weeks.
Do you guys mind if I just go ahead?
Sorry, I want to chime in here because I was trying to figure out why I'm not getting emails about this stuff, and I went and I tried to log in, and it said I needed to do this, that, or the other thing, and every time it said it was going to send me an email so I can fix it, and it's not sending me email, and so I can't get in. I don't know what's broken. Is there somebody who I can work with one-on-one to fix this?
Hey Jay, it's Michael Stroh with OCP. I'm gonna drop this on the chat.
I can't hear you.
I'll do that.
You better now.
We have to do that anyway.
Hello.
Hi, but you're waiting.
Hello, Nathan. Oh, we have to leave the meeting.
Okay.
Hey, I'll send an email between Michael Schill and Jay Talbot just so they can resolve the email issue.
Okay. Thank you. Thanks, David.
Everyone else has left the call.
All right, thanks everybody.
Bye.
Okay.
Bye.